Hey class, it's Mr. Andrews. Wanted to go over a little bit about Major Paper 2. And the way we're going to approach that today is we're actually going to look at a sample paper which examines a comparison very similar to what we're doing in our Major Paper 2. This particular paper examining a connection between a novel written by Elie Wiesel about the Holocaust as a secondary source in order to really analyze a question about the film Life is Beautiful, which, if you haven't seen it, by the way, is a beautiful Italian film. It is subtitles, but I can tell you right now, it is one of it is a beautiful film to watch, and I know that's in the title, but whatever. So that said, I wanted to go through a sample essay, give you guys a sense of what this essay can look like, and try to give you something really concrete to look at. A couple reminders that if you are in Group C, we should be meeting today. I believe I am meeting with the groups as individuals. I don't know if there's any group conferencing happening. You'll have to look in your inbox to see what time and all that, but I will be there to meet with you. Group B, likewise, you have received now instructions on what we'll be doing for Wednesday. And a reminder too that the deadline for this sucker is Thursday night, right before spring break starts. Although I guess everything kind of feels like break anymore. But that said, let's take a look at the sample paper. So the sample paper you'll see here is titled "Eliseo as Victim Rather Than Prophet in Life is Beautiful." So there's already an allusion to the fact that this paper is going to be focused on a character. This character's name is Eliseo. And while I know you haven't seen the movie, nevertheless, I think from some context clues we'll be able to pick that up, right? So right away, one of the things I've annotated here is that the title indicates the main claim. One thing that could be really helpful for this is using your title as a way of contextualizing the paper. And that means setting up what your main claim is through the title, or at least implying it, right? So the main character of Life is Beautiful is clearly Guido. For the film centers on his courtship of Dora and his subsequent efforts to protect their son from the Nazis. So right away, we have an immediate reference to the main work that the paper is going to focus on. Straight out of the chute, your paper should be identifying what is that primary work, right? Just like we talked about with that introductory paragraph. Yet, the movie contains plenty of supporting characters whose function in the plot we are left to determine. Somewhat unclear is the role of the German doctor who befriends Guido, enjoys exchanging riddles with him, but fails to help Guido in the concentration camp. But even more unclear is the role of Guido's uncle, Eliseo. Although we see him quite a bit during the early part of the movie, he disappears midway through it. So this sentence starts to indicate then what is the problem? What is the interpretive work that needs to be done? Similar to what that sample introduction did, right? The idea here is that a good Major Paper 2 is essentially setting up what is the primary work and what is the thing that is perplexing or not clear in the text, right, early on. So what is the writer, Roberto Benigni's purpose in not having this major character remain on the screen longer? So notice here that they'll actually ask the question outright here. You can imply the question, but this paper actually asks it outright. You'll also notice that they're not just interested in what's perplexing about this movie. They're also specifically interested in what was the director's purpose. So that's another layer of interpretation here, is that they're not only interested in what is the role of Eliseo in this movie, but also what was the author trying to say with the character. So there's a couple layers of meaning that they're going to try to derive here, right? So it is unusual and therefore puzzling for a character's stature to change so dramatically. Nevertheless, ultimately, it is possible to understand what the maker of Life is Beautiful is up to in handling Eliseo this way. Evidently, Benigni is using him to illustrate the terrible fate that can strike Guido and his family, while at the same time Eliseo himself does not seem aware of the danger that threatens him. Though he is eventually killed by the Nazis, apparently he is not able to predict his doom. Therefore, he also lacks the capacity to warn Guido about the utter murderousness of the Nazis. Ultimately, the filmmaker presents Eliseo chiefly as a victim, who is unable to teach others that genocide is coming. So, like most good papers, right, this introduction ends with a sense of their main claim, their interpretive claim. You'll also notice that the secondary source is nowhere to be found in this. It is an option for you that you don't have to mention the secondary source here. In fact, it's quite possible that they're going to be able to talk about this character throughout the paper and only need to bring in that secondary source when it seems appropriate. So this is an option for you if you feel like it feels forced to bring in the secondary source in some way in the introduction, then maybe just bring it up when it seems relevant and pertinent to the conversation. We're going to see that here in a little bit. So let's look at body paragraph 1 here, right? Sorry about this. Let's see. So they say, in one sense, Eliseo is a teacher. As head waiter at the hotel where Guido also wants to serve tables, Eliseo drills his nephew in the basics of such work. But in the rest of the film, Eliseo's suffering does not inspire him to instruct Guido or others about Nazi and fascist oppression. In this respect, he markedly differs from the character of Moishi, the beadle. I don't know what names I'm reading, guys. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing, in Elie Wiesel's memoir, Night. So this is where they bring up that conversation piece, right? It's where there's a character comparison. So Moishi is a teacher in the sense that he instructs young Eli about the Kabbalah and other Jewish mystical lore. The older Wiesel even refers to Moishi as his spiritual master. Unlike Eliseo, though, Moishi assumes the role of teacher in another sense. Having survived a Nazi massacre, he takes it upon himself to warn the Jews of Sighet that they are in danger. Eliseo undertakes no such role, despite the pain inflicted upon him. So again, here's a character comparison that's taking place, right? And again, they only brought it up when it seemed appropriate to do so. In fact, when we first encounter Eliseo, he has apparently been victimized by a gang of anti-Semitic hooligans whose thinking resembles the Nazis, even if they are not Nazis themselves. In a conspicuous shift from the slapstick comedy that marks the film's opening moments, Guido and his friend discover that the gang has vandalized Eliseo's apartment. Yet, though Eliseo is ruffled by this violence, he tries quickly to resume his ordinary life. More precisely, he gives the two friends a brief explanation of the apartment's layouts and then rushes off to his job. In other words, the film provides no evidence that his experience with the gang has made Eliseo aware that a larger catastrophe awaits him. So what they're doing in this paragraph, right, is they're making that move that is very common to what we've been doing all semester, which is they are providing evidence, they're providing data and observations, and then they're making the move from an observation to an interpretation, right? So here's what we see, and then in other words, the film provides no evidence that this experience has made Eliseo aware. So they're moving towards interpretation by reviewing some of what we know about this character. Let's keep going. Indeed, later we see Eliseo again being self-victimized by anti-Semitism, and yet not sensing that he is in mortal danger. Obviously, he's disturbed when his horse is painted green and marked with the label Jewish horse. Nevertheless, the film does not show this incident expanding his consciousness. Rather, the horse soon becomes a comical means for Guido to rescue Dora from her obnoxious fiancé. When Eliseo is then deported with Guido to a Nazi concentration camp, his somber face indicates that he does feel anxiety and sorrow, yet he does not seem to sense that he is close to being executed. Even in the waiting room that we, the film's audience, realize is the entrance to a gas chamber, Eliseo obligingly removes his clothes when the Nazis order him to do so. Evidently, he prefers to believe that he is still in a civilized world where he will suffer no mortal harm. So again, making observations and then drawing inferences from it, right? The casuality and the compliance with which he seems to approach what's happening. This character clearly doesn't seem aware of what's happening to them. So when a female Nazi guard stumbles in front of him, he politely offers her his arm, believing that his courtly manners are still relevant in this awful place. This misguided display of courtesy is, in fact, the last we see of him, as if filmmaker Benigni wants to leave us chiefly with a sense of his short-sightedness. So again, drawing inference is not just about what it reveals about the character, but getting to that second layer of their purpose, which is to understand what is the author trying to reveal through the character, right? That this is perhaps a short-sighted character. Earlier in the film, Eliseo had instructed Guido that to be a waiter is not to be an absolute servant. His message was that even waiters should uphold an air of personal dignity rather than grovel as slaves. In the scene just before his death, Eliseo does act in a dignified manner towards the Nazi guard, but at this moment, he seems to prefer dignity to gaining real knowledge about the Nazis' real intentions, which involves sending him soon to death. In a way, he does wind up a slave to them, for he does nothing to challenge their control over his fate. So far the paper has examined specific scenes and explained their significance, right? We've been given a lot of specific slices of significance and those specific areas, right? But let's go on and see where they go from here. So they say, interestingly, the film does not show us Eliseo's actual execution. So it points out something that's kind of curious, right? Something that you can consider too is, as the comment mentions here, maybe it could be useful to consider not just what was said in a story, but also what was not said, what didn't happen that could have happened, right? So there was clearly a choice here, an authorial choice to show us everything leading up to an execution, then not show that to us. So perhaps Benigni, as a maker of the movie, thought we simply did not need to watch it. Also, perhaps he thought it would be difficult to present such a scene and then go back to Guido's farcical antics. Similarly, Guido himself eventually is killed off-screen, a cinematic device that allows us to remember him mostly as the amusing, good-natured guardian of his son. Nevertheless, we the audience, infer that Nazis have murdered both men, and in Eliseo's case, the victim clearly does not expect his death. Should we therefore criticize Eliseo for showing willful naivety? So once they get past, establishing who this character is, they now start to discuss, right, what are some ways of maybe even responding to this, right? This charge may be a little too harsh. Plenty of people at this time, including Jews, did not imagine that the Germans' anti-Semitism would turn into wide-scale homicide. Furthermore, even if we think Eliseo should have tried to teach others about Nazis' campaign of terror, he might not have succeeded. He might have gotten the same reaction that Moishe got when he tried to convince his neighbors that destruction was headed toward them. So again, bringing back that secondary piece. You'll notice again how secondary it's been, right? It's only really been a point of comparison for one specific aspect of the character, right? So whatever respect Moishe acquired as a teacher of mysticism, the villagers did not accept him as a teacher of politics and history. Another comparison with the secondary work, right? They refused to learn from his account of his suffering. Eventually, Mussel reports he even gave up trying to instruct them. He was weary of speaking. He wandered in the synagogue or in the streets with his eyes down, his back bent, avoiding people's eyes. Eliseo might have fallen into the same mood of futility had he, too, tried to spread the alarm. Furthermore, had he indeed managed to warn his loved ones about the Nazi menace, Guido might very well have been unable to prevent or escape the dire circumstances into which the Nazis plunge him. So again, they're thinking not only of what the author didn't do, revealing the execution, they're also thinking about what didn't the character do, and what would have possibly been some of the consequences in this world that was built in the movie, right? What would have been some of the likely outcomes or consequences to that character had they taken a different path. One of the consequences that they point to is this sort of weariness, right? This apathy, this fatigue that another character in another story exhibits. And so one of the ways you might think about making comparisons too is to look at one character's journey and ask, what is another character in the secondary work that maybe has a different experience and a different journey, and what inferences can we draw from that in terms of like how this other character's journey could have gone or would have gone. So that said, all the same, Eliseo's failure to grasp the sheer enormity of the German menace still seems important enough for the filmmaker to call attention to it. So as they finish up here, especially because of Roberto Benigni's energetic performance, the character of Guido is an overwhelming presence in Life is Beautiful. But Eliseo is a significant character too, even if he vanishes well before the film is over. Through his relative passivity, he demonstrates that not everyone who suffered Nazi oppression was driven to educate others about it. Though it would be unfair for us to blame him for his behavior, he seems to exist in the film as a reminder that we have an obligation to teach about genocide. So now they're drawing inferences again on what is the overall message then that this character is maybe being utilized for or to display. Again, they're coming back to that piece of what was the author's maybe motives or purpose in portraying the character as they did, right? They offer that now in this conclusion. This is where we get the most crystallized answer to their question, really, right? Is at the very end. It is quite possible that whatever claim you come up with in the intro, like they did, may become a little more specific by the end of the paper, and that's okay. This is analysis. That means that over time we're kind of moving from something that is indefinite and unclear to something that is very clear and very specific. And that movement should be gradual, and it should take place over and through the details. So as we finish, let's take a look at this last sentence, right? We have an obligation to teach others about genocide through films such as Life is Beautiful and through multiple other ways. So the concluding paragraph again recaps their main argument. It adds a caution against the judgment, judging the character too harshly, tries to put things in context, and the focus remains more on analysis rather than on evaluation. In other words, they're not evaluating what we should feel about the character, but instead understanding. It focuses on understanding what is the character trying to say, right? The word should isn't there so much as what is likely, right? They're making inferences about what is the message here, not necessarily what should we feel about it. Okay, so that said, a couple tips, a couple takeaways, and I'd like to leave you with. So the very first one is this: make sure that your primary work is primary and that your secondary work is secondary, right? Your secondary work should only take up 20% of the paper, and it should only be used really to comment on some aspect of the main topic, the primary work, right? The other thing is this: with your primary work, make sure that you have a very specific and narrow focus. Okay, what that means is maybe you're focusing on a character or a problem or a theme or a message. You should be focused on one particular layer of the text, not asking too broad of a question, not asking just a general question about the text, but really focusing and hunkering in on one specific layer of the text. The other thing is you should be drawing inferences from the details. There should be connections to the details, rather than just giving us a meaningless summary that isn't going anywhere. Anytime you include details from the text, it should be purposeful, and it should be supporting some sort of interpretation and some sort of argument or claim that you're making about the text. Finally, you want to think about this in terms of analysis and not evaluation. Be careful to avoid the temptation to evaluate and talk about things in terms of being good or bad or right or wrong. Rather, you want to approach the text and describe it on its own terms, just trying to understand it. What is it trying to, or seemingly trying to say through the details, and trying to understand that, rather than passing some sort of judgment on it, right? Whether this is a good move or a smart move, or this is the right message or the wrong message. You want to avoid evaluation. So those are a few tips I have for you. And I hope this was helpful in terms of giving you something concrete to look at for this paper. So good luck to you guys, and I'll be in touch.